Hello fellow cinephiles, the Film Dude here, thanks for joining me today. So with the release of Scream 7 coming out, I decided to sort of delve in and have a look at the particular movies from the Scream franchise that I really enjoyed, talk about aspects of them, but also talk about the impact that they had on me and what they mean to me ultimately, and how they shaped my viewing of horror films and slasher films in general. Now, I know there's been a lot of videos and video essays on this particular film and franchise, and I know that different people have different opinions and different perspectives of it. That's not kind of what I really want to do with this. I more just want to talk about what the effect and impact it had on me personally, rather than reviewing all the films. I will be talking about aspects of them, certain scenes and things that transpire and character development. But it's really about the franchise overall and what I think of it. So Scream came out in 1996, which everyone knows. I was about 14 years of age at the time. And I saw the cover of it at the video store, and I wasn't quite sure what the film was or what it was about. By the look of it and the look on the back of the cover of the VHS, I guess it would have been at that time. It wasn't until I started hearing about this film that I decided to check it out. And I'm so glad I did. I really loved it. I love the mystery aspect to it. I love the intensity, and it became one of my favourite films, one of my favourite horror films at that time, and it still is in certain aspects. Upon viewing this film the first time, I hadn't really seen many slasher films, so all the sort of meta aspect to it was lost on me. It wasn't until years later and multiple viewings that I started to realise what the film was actually doing, how clever it was, and how it was reinventing the slasher film after viewing a number of slasher films and seeing certain aspects that Scream was talking about and what they did with it. But that didn't kind of matter. I just really enjoyed what I was watching. I did realise I was watching something that was very different to other films. I had seen other films that I'd seen the subgenre, should I say, of the slasher genre. And I think this was a film that really started my passion, sort of love for the slasher film. And the same goes for Wes Craven. I wasn't completely familiar with him upon viewing this film either, as I hadn't seen the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and there was a few other films that he did I hadn't ultimately viewed by the time this came out. But much like the movie, Craven became one of my favourite directors, horror directors, and directors in general, that I tracked down and watched all of his movies after viewing this film. And he's still one of my favourite directors of all time now. Like I mentioned, it would be years later and many viewings before I understood all the meta aspects to the movie. So I just want to talk a little bit about particular scenes and particular things in the first Scream film that I really liked and that sort of had a bit of an effect on me. And the scenes that really stick out for me was the opening, of course, the very classic opening with Drew Barrymore, and the ringing phone and the conversation that happens and the brutality of that particular scene and the intensity and scariness of it, which really set the tone for that film as well as the sequel. And it really showed this killer was someone not to mess with, and became such an iconic character of that. And also the fact of having this opening scene with Drew Barrymore, you thinking she's the lead and they kill her off. Like, that was a real big shock. And I didn't really understand the meta-ness to that until I saw Psycho and understood what Craven was doing there. That Hitchcock did, once all that stuff happens to Drew Barrymore's character, Casey, it skips to Sydney and we introduce to our true lead. And what this scene does really well is it puts you in Casey's shoes. It really puts you in there. You're feeling everything you're feeling with her. The camera moves around the house with her. You see her doing things and you're up close. And you're reacting to the call that she's getting as she's reacting to it. It was a very immersive experience. And this is something that we didn't always see within that slasher genre. And I think that's a good example of not only Kevin Williamson's writing, but also Wes Craven and what he wanted to do with the film. And obviously the third act is probably one of the best sequences, where we get to Stu's house, the murders continue on, the mystery about what's going on, the way that they get the crowd out of there, and the ultimate fight that happens in the end between Billy, Stu and Sydney, as well as Gail. And just the way it unfolds and how intense it is, and the killer reveal is really good. There's a whole aspect to it I really loved. Like I mentioned, I always thought the cast was good. I think Neve Campbell's fantastic as Sydney. She brings a reality to her, a grounded performance. It's a sort of every woman character in a lot of ways that is shaped by her experiences. There are sequences in it where, especially with the phone call she gets from the killer, where she talks about, it's always about some big-breasted girl running upstairs when she should be running out the front door. It's insulting. And that's exactly what happens to her in a very meta way. But she really brought such an interestingness. She really brought so much to the Sydney character that I've always really loved her, and she's become one of the final girls, or the slasher heroines that we all sort of love, especially in this particular genre. Out of it, Jamie Kennedy's Randy was the real standout for me, being a sort of film geek or a film fan at the time, and having a character like that you could relate to and sort of get into what he's talking about and understanding, and his sort of version of the rules of this slasher film, how to survive it, became a staple for this genre, and it's something that's been used multiple times since then, and obviously before then too, but it was more described in this film. He's just a character you wish you could be in the film ultimately. Obviously you're not getting shot, but being that sort of person who had that knowledge of the films and helped sort of piece things together. That's all what we really loved. We all aspired to be someone like him. And what also defined the characters were they were all specifically different. They all had their sort of quirks and were well-written characters. I do remember the cast talking about how simple the script was, so maybe the characters weren't that well defined there, but it's what the actors brought to it. They all served their purpose, and they sort of are your normal characters in this genre, but they're also not. They're different in the character development. Who they are as people, how definitively different they are from each other, and how they sort of subverted people's expectations of these particular characters in this genre. And that all comes down to Kevin Williamson and the performances by the actors involved. And not only was it trying to do something different within the genre, it was sort of a return to form for Wes Craven, who he hadn't had a hit in a while, and sort of needed to rejuvenate things. He sort of lost his passion for it. And then this script came across the desk, and he knew that this was something he had to do. And we're so thankful he did, because he restarted his career in an interesting way and became fully known and really respected because of what he did with this film and its sequels. That it sort of rejuvenated his career and also the slasher genre that was slowly dying at the time. And it was the first film that Kevin Williamson had written that became a huge hit. And he would subsequently write other films like I Know What You Did Last Summer and a variety of others, as well as go on to TV shows, some horror, some not, with The Following and also Dawson's Creek. And it sort of propelled him forward and gave him a career. And that's what this film really did, and that's the impact that it had on the cast, but also the impact it had on me as a viewer in sort of forming my ideas about what sort of horror I like and how the slasher genre really spoke to me in a lot of ways. The first film really left a lasting impression that still affects me today, and it's a film I do return to time and time again. And with the new release of the 4K, that's fantastic. I'm really back into this sort of genre, especially with the new film coming out. With the success of this film, they went on to make a sequel. I've never been more excited to go to the movies, because this was the first Scream I get to see at the cinema. The first one was on VHS, and this was my first experience in the cinema with it. And I just got sucked into it. As years have gone on, the second one's more my favourite over the first. I appreciate and respect what the first film did, and we wouldn't have this sequel without it. But there's just certain aspects to the second one I enjoyed more. Not only was it the first film I saw, but in the small town I grew up in, we only had one cinema, and we always had to wait for the prints to be sent for us to view. Sometimes they'd show up on time, sometimes they wouldn't. And it was a big event, because it was a small cinema, so you had to buy a ticket early and get to a seat that wasn't assigned like they used to do before everybody else piled in. And sessions were mostly packed because of the fact it was only one cinema in a small town. And felt unsafe, and that's kind of the feeling that the movies create, 1 and 2 especially, with the sort of dread and fear and the intensity that they both had. This, much like the first film, really left a mark on me. And I really liked the way they continued the story, how we saw Sydney in college now, trying to move on after the events of the previous film, only to succumb to another killer trying to kill her. This was always a great aspect to the movies, in my opinion, the way they evolved the characters, especially the mains with Gale Weathers, Sidney Prescott and Dewey Riley. Still to this day, even though I've obviously seen this scene many times, I still clearly remember the opening of this film. We've got two characters going to the movies, and ultimately they're going to see film adaptation of the events of the previous film, and ultimately set upon by a killer. And it's Jada Pinkett Smith's performance here, and the sequence itself, where she gets stabbed first and she's shocked in the cinema. No one's really noticing because they're really into it. People are all wearing the Scream masks and suits, and they're really into watching the movie. They don't realise what's transpiring. And there's something about that really affected me, to be in a place with a lot of people, you're thinking you're safe, but you're ultimately not. And the fear of that happening is quite extreme. Just something about the era and the timing of this, the way she's walking through the crowd and constantly getting stabbed, to ultimate death where she crawls up on to the stage with a screen behind her of the killer killing Casey Becker character played by Heather Graham, and ultimately she screams and falls dead. It is definitely one of the best openings and rivals the first one in so many ways. And this was a staple that they would try and recreate throughout the rest of the series, of the opening scene being the most impactful aspect to it and really most shocking and powerful aspect to the film. And like I mentioned, I like the direction they took with it. It showed the evolution of Sydney, which I mentioned, and surviving her ordeal and trying to move forward. She becomes ultimately a stronger person because of what happened, and tries her best to move on. But I think there's a bit of doubt and fear in her that this could happen again, which would have an impact on all of us if these sort of things happen to us. And I think that is another sort of thing that sort of personalizes a movie and allows the audience to become affected and involved in what's going on. Because you start to try and imagine or feel what the character's feeling. Like, it's the connection we feel to her that is the most effective. And that's why she's such a great character, in the way that she's written, but also the way that Neve Campbell's able to convey that in such a realistic and powerful way. In fact, the whole movie itself really is about moving on, or trying to move on. Cotton Weary, accused of murdering Sydney's mother, he tries to move on with what's going on to try and reclaim his life, and wants to do an interview with Sydney. Gail's moving on in a negative way, in that she is getting obsessed with her career, and this began that, and she starts to get affected as the movie goes on, and especially when it re-examines her and Dewey's relationship. Randy, like Sydney, is trying to move on from what happened. And even the killer herself, Billy's mum, she's trying to move forward as well, but gets caught up in what's happening. What's the quote? One generation's tragedy becomes another generation's joke. It's kind of what Dewey says. But that applies here in a lot of ways, especially within the story itself. And I couldn't go further on talking about this movie without talking about Randy's death. Now, like I mentioned, he had a big impact on me in the first, and he was really cool in this one. But to see him killed off like that, it felt like Kevin Williamson and Wes Craven were like, let's kill off the knowledgeable character. Let's kill off the character that everyone seemed to be connected to. And that was a really sad experience. And that would have a similar impact when we get to Scream 5 with the killing when they killed off Dewey's character. But this was their way of saying anyone can be attacked, anyone can die, and also they had to do something drastic and take away another main character. But after all these years, now I appreciate it. I understand what they were doing, why they were doing it, and we get to see Randy reappear in video form in Scream 3, so that was kind of interesting. That ties all the trilogy together. But there was just something, that had a real impact on me and affected me in a lot of ways, because I felt like myself was killed off. But like Randy says in the film, this has many more kills, more dramatic elements, and it sort of really is telling a overall really interesting story with interesting enough characters, maybe not as interesting as the original cast, but they do pretty well with they do pretty well in defining these characters in the way they do. So the first two Scream films have always meant a lot to me, and I do return them time and time again, and having them on 4K adds another element to it, which I really liked. And they're probably the last two really intense ones until we get to Scream 5 and 6. Because with the next film, Scream 3, it was a real departure from what we'd seen before. The studio wanted much more of a comical film than an intense slasher movie, and that's kind of what they went with. It had a lot of rewrites. There was a lot of things that couldn't be done. Like there was a whole sequence at the original beginning where Sydney was attacked again, and that gives her a reason why she's living out in the middle of nowhere. And I think Sydney's storyline itself is probably the only thing that stays true to the original two films. Kevin Williamson didn't come back as writer as he was busy doing other things. Writer, and he kind of didn't quite understand the characters. Sydney's the only one that felt consistent. They did bring on a female writer, and she did write and had knowledge of those characters and added a lot to the Sydney character. But everything about it felt different. The opening sequence is interesting. You know, I did like it, you know, Cotton getting the call and ultimately killed off, and I liked that sequence. But I would have really liked to see the original sequence. And even like the death scenes are fine, but they're just a little bland, I guess. They're not as cool or as intense as the first two movies, and it loses something because of that. And I think this is one of the... I can see why this film people don't like as much. I've always had a soft spot for it, and I think as a conclusion to a trilogy, it's not too bad. It could have been a little better, but I kind of like what they did with it. And I like there was only one killer. Everyone talks about how crappy the ending is and the reveal of the killer. I liked the killer. I liked his connection to Billy and Sydney and what transpired in the last two films. I really liked that. It was a really good way of trying to conclude the series in a solid way. The characters are all a bit thin and bland, to be honest, except for your main characters. And having someone like Parker Posey, it's going to be unique, odd and wacky, and much more of a comedy than you really would or expect it to be. Not saying she's not great in the film, as she's playing a version of Gail Weathers in the movie, which I really like. And seeing those two together is really fun, but it just adds this sort of goofiness to it that takes away from what they were trying to do. But in that scene where we return to Woodsboro and we see all the sets that are built on the soundstage, we get to see the late, great Roger Corman playing a producer in it, which I thought was a great fitting aspect to it and great thing for him to be able to do. It's only recently that I started to question Scream 3, as I've watched it not long ago. And it lost a bit of the fun and magic that I originally saw in it. And I know to some people it's one of their favourites, but it just loses something to the overall story and what Kevin Williamson began with the first two movies. And it's just a much more of a weaker story or weaker film within that, the first trilogy. Now I kind of want to talk about Scream 4. It's not completely focused on Sydney. Yes, she's in it, she does play a big part to it, but it has shifted to new characters and it has tried to reinvent the slasher film again, once again. And that's kind of what I expected from Scream 4 when it was first announced and then it came out. I was hoping it was going to do what the first Scream did, but it actually doesn't really do that. Yes, it addresses certain aspects to movie tropes and things at the time, and it sort of has this glow that the Saw films had. And it opens with like 3 openings, which I always thought was stupid and took me out of the movie. But upon rewatching it, I can appreciate them a lot more because of what they were talking about in regards to certain deaths and certain tropes that were starting to emerge in this sort of genre, and how this genre was once again slowly disappearing. While this brought the genre back in an interesting way, it didn't fulfill fans' wants and needs, and I did feel a little disappointed. It has since grown on me as a movie. I do appreciate it now, but when I first saw it, I was a bit disappointed in it. It didn't have the same impact or something that I wanted. It could have been in part because it had been a while since there was a Scream film, and I thought that the third one was a good way to conclude the trilogy. But I did really enjoy aspects to it. I liked that Sydney and Gail and Dewey were back. They were back in Woodsboro, that Gail and Dewey are married and struggling, and also looking at new characters. With Emma Roberts' character being Sydney's niece, and you've got Kirby played by Hayden Pateri. She's great in it, and sort of a great replacement in a way, or a continuation of the Randy character, which I really liked. And with this sort of 3 openings, it kind of loses something when we get to the real opening that sort of, in a lot of ways, just copies Tatum's death in Scream 1, which I guess it's homaging in a lot of ways and paying respect to that. I just felt they could have done something different, as the first two films had great openings that I just felt this film was worthy of a much better opening. And there are alternate cuts to the film where the opening plays out differently, and I enjoy that a lot more. And I really want to see an assembly cut of the film with all the deleted scenes. There is some online, and it adds so much more to it. And I just want to sort of wish they would release a version of it like that with all the pieces back in place. So this was sort of reteaming Craven and Williamson again together, and it's definitely returned to something interesting, and it's definitely tries to get back to something more intense and scary than the third film did. Well, it didn't redefine the genre like the first film did, and I was hoping it would. It still has the commentary on the state of the genre, and was ultimately trying to recapture something they didn't done in the first film, but it just didn't achieve what it really wanted to do. Even with this fourth film, my love for Scream was still strong and growing. But it was a good continuation, and we got to see Sydney sort of moving forward with what's happening. Even though things happened to her in the film, she's moving forward. And it just didn't take any risks like Scream 2 did, or 3 in that matter, killing off a known and main character from the beginning of the series. It wouldn't be until the fifth one that they really took a chance and killed off one of the main and most loved characters, Dewey Riley. So those are the ones I really wanted to focus on. In closing, I am going to just touch on 5 and 6 and talk about those films, but also Scream 7. Before Scream 5 came out, or Scream as it was known when it was first released, which was the thing they started to do, just naming them after the original film, I had previously watched Ready or Not. And watching this film, it just occurred to me, like, it's a film I really love, but it just occurred to me how great these two would be at directing a Scream film. And I just thought that watching it, I said they would be perfect for it. And lo and behold, they made a Scream 5. I really liked it. It tried to get back to the original film in a lot of ways. We're introduced to new characters this time around. To begin with, there's no mention of Sydney. She does come into it later. But it's just sort of like trying to take things in a different direction. Yes, the legacy characters return. Gale Weathers and Dewey Riley return as well. But it's really focused on Sam Carpenter and her sister. And how they're set upon, but why they're set upon. That Samantha is actually Billy Loomis's love child, and it's really about focusing on her with also bringing in the legacy characters. They did well with the film in returning to it. There are some memorable characters. I think Mindy's really great. She does a fantastic job in it, and she's sort of the Randy replacement, or a new improved Randy in a lot of ways, and gives the information of things I need to know, which is something that began in the original film, so that was kind of a cool carry-on. And I felt excited watching this for the first time. I did see this twice in the movies, but I just felt more invested here than I was with Scream 3 and 4. It just felt like it was trying to restart the franchise and do something different with it. Did I ever think we'd be seeing Scream 5 or 6? No, I didn't. I thought it would end with 3, but here we are. And some of the death scenes were really angry and aggressive, which I didn't expect. Sheriff Judy getting killed in front of a house in such a brutal way. It felt both parts refreshing, but also nostalgic of what we had previous. Even as going as far as calling one of the characters Wes, which I thought was really cool. It's definitely a fitting tribute to the Craven movies, and while adding its own thing, bringing back, like I mentioned, legacy characters and new characters. Some of the stuff worked and some of it didn't. I thought the reasoning behind why they were doing it was a bit silly, but it definitely reinvigorated my love for these movies. A new version of it. But it did lose certain things. We lost the red herring aspect of who's the killer type thing, and certain situations didn't ultimately make sense at times. But it was really clever in its sort of talking about the genre itself, referencing Scream, like Stab Really Happened, the movie, and within the universe, and how it's sort of dated exactly like Scream is, but in a good way, and how it's sort of really talking about the the fans out there, the toxic fans of not only the Scream franchise, but other franchises as well. And that's where the meta aspect comes into it. But Scream 6, I like Scream 6 a lot, I must admit. Yes, it is a little bit of a carbon copy to Scream 2, as all the characters are in college and they're getting attacked there, trying to move on from the events of the first film. But everything was kicked up here. Much like Scream 3, we changed locations. We're in New York, we're in the big city. I like the aspect of a killer running around in the city like that, and Tara's trying to move on, going to college, and Mindy's there, and all the other characters that survived the last film. And Sam goes there to sort of look out for her sister and protect her in a way, but gets a bit controlling. And it just was a much more intense film than the previous film, and much more, getting back to a more intense movie like the first two, but probably more intense. This sequence where Ghostface in a bodega uses a shotgun, which we'd never seen him kill with a weapon like that. And just the intensity of the character was full of anger and hate and violence, and the brutality of the deaths. The opening sequence with Samara Weaving's character, the brutality of the way she gets stabbed in that sequence sort of really had effect on you. And it was very shocking and intense. And I liked that because it brought it back to what the first films were doing. And bringing back these characters shaped by their events of what happened is great, and then introducing new characters. Mindy has a great moment where she explains that we're in a franchise rather than a sequel or prequel, and I like that. There are many aspects to it. There's a train sequences that's really good where Mindy gets stabbed, but just about how it's Halloween and all these people are dressed like horror characters, I thought was great. And the third act, I loved that the killers had sort of this warehouse where they had memorabilia of the murders that happened, and all the sort of Ghostface outfits and masks and how they used those, and how they sort of brought back Kirby as an FBI agent. I thought that was great. It sort of had an effect on me because it was so intense. I saw it twice in the movies, like the previous movies, and it sort of differed a little bit where we get to see the killer in the opening take off his mask. Ultimately, he's sort of set up this idea of what if we follow the killer and we see them, and I didn't like that. And I'm glad they did what they did with it. And I can see why people don't overly like this one. We've also got to remember that it's just a person in a mask. It's not the same killer every time, it's someone else. And there's a reasoning behind why the killers are doing what they're doing in this film. But there's just something about it I really enjoy, really love, and it has an impact on me. And it continues to have an impact on me. Like I mentioned previous, the Scream franchise in a lot of ways really shaped not only the type of horror films I like today, but also my experience with the genre. It showed me what I liked and didn't like, and made me feel things I didn't expect. It connected me to characters I didn't know I wanted to be or really wanted to be connected to. And it really put you in there. And it was really sort of a commentary on the genre itself, and which I learned a lot from and can see in multiple films that came after this and previous to this. While some of them are fantastic and some of them aren't, they're all great within the franchise itself, and I really like that. If you asked me years ago, do you think there'd be a Scream 7? I would say no. But here we are, Scream 7. So that's it. That's my breakdown of the Scream movies. My main focus is going to be 1 to 4, and I'm returning to seeing 7, so I might watch 5 or 6 again, but I just wanted to touch on those ones because it was aspects I liked. Anyway, that's it. That's my review of the Scream franchise. So if you like this video today, please hit subscribe down the bottom, follow me on Letterboxd and Facebook. Otherwise, until next time, enjoy the movies.